Now that we know all the things that we need to pay attention to when choosing different objects for our artworks, it's time to understand how light can affect our objects and their shadows. So in a previous lesson, we've touched upon how light works. We saw that it travels straight from the light source, and when it hits an object, it reflects and diffracts. But what happens to the reflected light? Well, that's something that we need to know, as it will help us blend our images together convincingly and realistically. And that's where ambient light comes in. Also known as indirect light, reflected light, and bounce light, ambient light is seen through its effect on shadows. So if ambient light is indirect light, the other category is direct light. Let's see what direct light is first. Direct light comes from a single source like the sun or a light bulb. When this type of light directly hits an object, it creates a high contrast shape of light. Where that direct light does not hit creates a shadow. Direct light is usually very strong because there is nothing between the light source and the object. Should the light ray stop right there, we would end up with flat, sharp shadows and a high contrast image like this diagram. But on our planet and in real life, shadows are not usually flat like that. And that's because when light hits a surface, it doesn't just die, but it bounces. When light bounces or reflects, it does so multiple times, creating soft and diffused shadows. These bounces of light are called ambient light. Ambient light is created by the light that is reflected between objects until it fades away. And because most surfaces are not smooth and have imperfections, light is reflected and dispersed randomly. Light does not bounce at precisely the same angle. If it did, we would still have flat shadows, but lighter. Ambient light is much weaker than direct light, because each time a ray of light bounces off something, it gets increasingly weaker until it fades away. Direct light overpowers ambient light, making it invisible. That's why we can only see ambient light in the shadows. Different areas of the shadow are affected differently by ambient light. Let's imagine a ray of light bouncing off the ground and hitting the sphere as ambient light. It would bounce up here, or here, but it's far unlikely to get between the object and the ground. This is because it's a very tight space, and although some light will manage to hit this area, only a few light waves will manage to get between the object and the ground. Most of the ambient light will bounce and hit parts of the object that are most exposed. Hence why in tight spaces, the shadow starts getting darker. This leaves us with what's called the contact shadow. That's this space here, which gets the least amount of reflected light, making it the darkest part of the shadow, the area where an object touches the surface. So each object needs to have two cast shadows underneath it. One that is produced by the light source, which gets darker as it gets closer to the object. This needs to be painted on the surface the object is sitting on. The other one is the contact shadow. This is the darkest part of the shadow, and it's the area where an object touches the surface. Let's look at an ambient light example to better understand how it looks in the real world. A perfect example of ambient light is when you're in a room with the light of the sun coming from outside. However, the sun is not directly hitting the window, but the room is still lit. How does this happen? That's ambient light. The sunlight outside is reflected and bounces between objects such as buildings until it gets into the room through a window. The light then carries on bouncing from one object to another within the room until it fades away. And since there is no direct light and only ambient light is present in the scene, you'll have soft shadows with graduated edges. That's because of the light bouncing off many objects, making the light source bigger, as explained in Lesson 1, Soft Light. Let's recap. Ambient light is created when light bounces between objects. Remember that ambient light is always present in a scene and visible through the shadows. Ambient light makes shadows lighter and softer, hence why shadows are never flat. The contact shadow results from a lack of ambient light, and it's the darkest part of the shadow. The tighter the space between an object and a surface, the darker the shadow. Scenes with only ambient light have soft shadows due to light bouncing off every object, making the light source bigger.